City Center Radio. It is episode 214, and I am your host, Christian Sanger. Today is Monday, January 22nd, 2024. Rolling into Monday. I hope your week gets off to a good start and you had a fantastic weekend. Very, very chilly out there. I know a lot of people opted to just lay low, maybe watch some TV, movies, whatever it is, and didn't go out if they didn't have to. And don't get me wrong, the days were actually not too bad. When, once the sun rose and got into the day a little bit, the weather was actually pretty good, but it got pretty darn chilly at night. I'm sure you don't need me to tell you that, but I opted for the more lay low option and got caught up, as it were, on the important things, like TV shows I've been meaning to get back into, and movies I haven't seen yet. And of course, doing lots of work for Holy City Center. If you like that work, by the way, please, if you have a moment and believe it is deserved, I'd appreciate your nominations in the Best of Charleston Awards. Nominations are open until the 25th, I believe, and I would appreciate that. And then, of course, if I'm lucky enough to be nominated for anything, I'll appreciate your votes in the final tally when that is eventually announced. But without any further delay, let's get into the real reason you're here. That's the latest news. Going to play a little bit of catch up on this episode again after the break at the end of last year, beginning of this year. So a couple of these are actually a little bit older news, but just in case you didn't catch it, I wanted to make sure you had updates on some stories that we've previously talked about on the show. The first one is about the way that we vote here in this state. You may remember that Charleston City Council, well, specifically Mayor Tecklenburg, actually, former Mayor John Tecklenburg now, but at the time was still in office, of course, had introduced some legislation, or actually not even legislation. It was more just a vote of support for the way we run runoff voting. That was a little too much there, wasn't it? The way we do runoff voting in this state. And even if city council was like, yeah, we would like that method, it wouldn't have gone into place. It would have basically been, if the state approved it down the line, the city of Charleston will be able to make that change. So specifically, a resolution that was supporting that change, it ultimately failed at the end of December. It did not gain any traction among the city council members. As I just mentioned, at his final city council meeting, which was on December 19th, outgoing Mayor John Tecklenburg introduced a resolution that calls on the state's legislature to add instant runoff, or what's also called ranked choice voting, as an alternative to current election methods. If you don't remember, ranked choice voting eliminates the need for a separate runoff election by allowing voters to rank their candidates when they go to the polls on election day. If no candidate has a majority of ballots cast, the lowest vote getter is eliminated, and then those votes go to the candidate that's ranked second on those ballots. The process would continue until one of the candidates reaches a majority. So basically, you would go to the polls on election day, however many candidates there are, you'd rank them one until whatever, and if they would tally just the first place votes. And if there is no majority, so no one gets above 50%, instead of going to a runoff election later, where you'd have to come back, a week later, 2 weeks later, whatever it may be, to vote on the top two vote getters, it would just go through that ranked choice. The person who received the least amount of votes, as far as first place votes, is out, and they would just, move down on those ballots. Okay, who did the people who voted for the last place finisher, who did they put second? And so on and so forth until they have someone with a majority. Now, as I mentioned, that change would actually require an actual change in state law. So really, even if city council said, yeah, we approve this resolution, nothing would have changed immediately. The state would actually have to weigh in at that point in time. And also adding another wrinkle to this, there's actually opposing bills, one calling for ranked choice voting and another that would ban it, are being introduced in the state legislature this year. So it's definitely something that's being discussed. It did not pass this resolution. Again, that doesn't really mean anything at this juncture here in the city of Charleston, but we'll see if any of those two opposing bills in the state legislature go through and if it leads to a change or not. We've talked about legislation as it relates to the health care of children, specifically trans children, on this podcast, including on Friday's episode. But believe it or not, there's actually a bill that would apply to all children that is currently being debated, and local lawmakers specifically are looking into this whole culture war of parental control or parental rights. And now it's going, as we mentioned, it's already into children's health care a little bit, but they're looking to expand it to cover any child. So not just any healthcare that has to do with gender affirming care. Now they're going after prescriptions of any kind. Now, part of this, of course, is you can guess what the two main reasons are. And if not, of course, it's they want to make sure that there's not some loophole that a child could go through to get any medications that may relate to gender affirming care. And of course, they also want to, as part of their ban on abortion, make sure children aren't getting, and when I say children, under 18, of course, but getting any kind of contraceptive medication, whether it's Plan B or mifepristone that you can use for abortions before the ban in South Carolina goes into effect. That's obviously what the basis of this is. And as usual, it's going to have unintended consequences because it would cover all prescriptions. And yes, the state Senate already passed their version of the bill. In fact, it was just this past Thursday. It would require parental approval for prescriptions for 16 and 17-year-olds. Now, obviously, younger than 16, children, we're used to that. Parents go to appointments with their children. That's nothing crazy, whether they choose to get those prescriptions filled or not, that's the parents' call. But this would specifically go after 16 and 17-year-olds who currently would not have to have parental consent as it relates to prescriptions. Not surprisingly, the people who actually deal with patients and actually understand these consequences, because this is their field of expertise, are opposing this. Dr. Elizabeth Mack, president of the South Carolina American Academy of Pediatrics, said, quote, "We have a lot of children in the state who, when they attempt to access health care, there may not be an available parent or a safe place for us to contact somebody to seek consent," end quote. If signed, this bill would require immediate parental consent for new medications, but healthcare providers worry it could do more harm than good. For instance, pediatricians are worried about access. Some have expressed concerns over teens in unique situations like homelessness, foster care, or maybe they're living with non-legal guardians. Obviously, that's not the majority of patients, but there is a percentage of that, and it's not fair to put them in that position, is their argument. Dr. Mack said, quote, "As the bill is written currently, we will need to be able to immediately access someone in order for them to be able to access health care," end quote. Some other folks who spoke in opposition of this legislation talked about examples such as sexually transmitted diseases or sexually transmitted infections or other issues that maybe it's not a safe situation for them to share with their parents, why they're trying to get health care. That could lead to things like being injured, thrown out of the house. Unfortunately, these are things that happen here. And again, much like any children who may be homeless in foster care, et cetera, the vast majority of patients needing medications, this wouldn't apply to them, but it does apply to some when they're in that age range. And so they're just expressing about how this misguided, in their view, this misguided attempt to give parents more rights, it could potentially just harm children, prevent them from getting care that they need, or even if, in some of these situations, the parents are like, well, yeah, you need the medication, for instance, like if they were to get a sexually transmitted infection, in all likelihood, a parent is not going to deny their child that prescription. But it could lead to, even though they get the prescription, other consequences, such as the ones I mentioned before. So where this stands now, the measure must go through the same process in the House before making it to the governor's desk, where he could then sign it into law if that's what he chooses to do. There have been some amendments that have been talked about. So we'll see what happens. So it's passed in the Senate. Next up is the House, and I'll be sure to keep you posted. This is another catch-up story, as it were, as this came out at the end of December, but just didn't really have a fit in any of the podcasts since the new year. South Carolina recently received a D- on their annual report card that looks at all states as it relates to gun laws and gun violence rates. South Carolina received this D- for failing to pass significant legislation to curb gun violence last year, and this is according to the report by the Giffords Law Center to Prevent Gun Violence. Other southern states, except for Florida, Virginia, and neighboring North Carolina, received grades of an F. This year, and this was when this came out, I should say last year, it came out on December 22nd. At that point, when the report came out, there was 1,114 people who were shot in 997 shooting incidents here in the Palmetto State. This is according to the Gun Violence Archive. You can visit that website, by the way, gunviolencearchive.org. Obviously, between the 22nd and the 31st, that number went up, but those were the most up-to-date numbers when the report came out. Now, out of those people that were shot, 395 died. The numbers really don't show a big difference from the year before. So in 2022, the state ended with 1,143 people that were shot in 1,004 incidents, and then of those, 431 died. So pretty much in line from from 2022 and 2023. Now, those numbers also show that the Palmetto State have an average of 21.3 gun deaths per 100,000 people this year, which is 48% higher than the national average. The data, combined with the lack of significant gun laws that were passed in 2023, is what ended up giving our state such a low grade. Now, despite that, state legislators are not just not passing legislation to help curb gun violence, they are introducing legislation to make it more likely that gun violence will occur. Now, specifically, one of those pieces of legislation was allowing gun owners to carry their firearms in public without a permit. The bill H 3594 passed in the House, but a different version passed in the state Senate. What that means is the two versions will have to come together and be reconciled in here this year, 2024. So they'll have to be the exact same pieces of legislation. So we'll see exactly what those details are. But it seems, unless they just hit a roadblock or they refuse to agree with each other, that some version of that bill that will allow people in the state to carry firearms in public without a permit. And lastly, we've talked a lot on this podcast about Moms for Liberty, what they've done in this state and others to school boards, how they have their eyes set on other positions in government throughout the country. And we've talked about what a danger it could be, although there are plenty of well-meaning people who believe certain aspects of what the group puts out there. There are some extremists, of course, and we're seeing an example of that here in this state, where taxpayers could soon be paying for a school run by Moms for Liberty here in Charleston. So that group is launching a taxpayer-funded public charter school that will be named the Ashley River Classical Academy. And not only would taxpayers have to pay for this, but it's not just a regular school. It's one with controversial curriculum that will set to serve as the school's foundation. So Moms for Liberty, for those who just don't know or need a refresher, they've been engaged in efforts across the country opposing LGBTQ plus rights and advocating for removing certain library books. And now they're trying to step into educational governance. So the Ashley River Classical Academy, which is slated to open for the 2024-2025 academic year, has been put together by some key Charleston Moms for Liberty members. Specifically, 3 of the 7 Ashley River Classical Academy board members are pretty prominently associated with the Charleston chapter of the group. Specifically, the one who stands out the most is Tara Wood, who serves as the Charleston chapter's chair. So what makes their curriculum controversial? The school is following the lead of a conservative educational perspective by endorsing this controversial Hillsdale College curriculum called the 1776 curriculum. This 1776 curriculum is developed by a small Michigan-based college, which has been at the center of some educational debates nationwide. Critics view it as a conservative reinterpretation of American history. In other words, leaving out very key details or just falsifying things, whitewashing them. They point specifically to whitewashing of topics like slavery, America's long racism problem, and the erasure of LGBTQ plus people. These are just some examples of why this curriculum is controversial. it also aligns with how there's this national trend with conservative groups, specifically Moms for Liberty, but there are others out there that are pushing for more, quote unquote, patriotic educational content, end quote. Nothing wrong with being patriotic and loving your country, but if you can't admit there's been mistakes and problems in its past and its, present, that's not really telling the truth, and that's not really educational. You don't have to bash the country in that curriculum, of course, but you need to teach accurate information. So the oversight of this Ashley River Classical Academy would fall under Erskine College, which is a small Christian institution with recent fundamentalist leanings, which has been reported by the Post and Courier. This arrangement has raised concerns for a couple reasons. Number one, Erskine College is facing financial distress and accreditation issues, which obviously both of those are worrisome. So you've got a school who is having financial problems that's going to oversee this school. Well, what's going to happen if they can't continue on? And if they're not accredited, that means that they're not seen as a legitimate academic institution. So also, it's concerns because they're sponsoring charter schools without any substantial state standards or oversights. So, a whole lot of issues, which, hey, look, if this is a school that gets its own funding and parents want to send their kids there, okay, that's your call. You do what you want to do. If that's what you want your children to go to, that's your call. I think the big issue here is that this would be taxpayer funded. Why should we be funding a school that has this kind of controversial curriculum, that is not teaching children accurate history, is leaving out important things, is clearly pushing a political and religious agenda? That shouldn't be taxpayer funded. That doesn't seem to be too out there, right? I would think if the opposite were true, and now granted, I'm sure some of these folks in Moms for Liberty would claim that public schools are pushing a political agenda, but putting that aside, if there were a taxpayer-funded school that was, pushing some super liberal agenda, was anti-religion, whatever it may be, that the people who don't believe in that would be saying, "Hey, this shouldn't be taxpayer-funded," and I agree, it shouldn't be. Regardless of the side you're on, you don't want to fund a school that is pushing a particular agenda. And again, I know there's some parents out there that believe public schools are pushing an agenda. I think that's highly overstated. I'm sure there's some teachers here and there that maybe are teaching some topics or leaning into politics when maybe they shouldn't be, and parents have every right to be upset about that. But by and large, because of the oversight and everything like that, public schools are trying to just teach accurate history, whether that is uncomfortable for you or not, and teaching accurate information and other topics. But we all know the big pushes here isn't about like math. It's about history. It's about English courses as far as ones that involve reading particular books, learning about certain types of people. So again, you want your kid to go to this school, that's your call. If you're a parent, you want to pay for it, or however that setup works in your state. I know there's vouchers in some states and all sorts of other things. Cool, go. You do what you want to do. That is your call. But we shouldn't have to pay for it, I think, is the bottom line. And again, I don't think that is this out there crazy belief on my part. I think if tables were turned, they would believe the same. So that'll do it for this edition of Holy City Center Radio. I hope you have an amazing week ahead. If you have a moment, please rate and review this podcast and subscribe if you haven't already. That way you do not miss an episode anytime it comes out, which is Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. Yeah, for the most part, I know I have my moments where, I say, I'm going away, I'll have an episode, don't worry about it, and then I don't. It happens once in a while, but for the most part, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, I'm here talking about the latest news in Charleston. You can also go to patreon.com/Holy City Center to help support the site and the podcast. And as I mentioned at the top of the show, nominate Holy City Center or this podcast in their respective categories at Charleston City Paper's Best of Charleston Awards. Huge thank you to Lindsay Marie Collins, who produces this and every episode of Holy City Center Radio. I'm always grateful for her hard work. She makes the podcast sound amazing, but I'm extra grateful for today. You will not notice on your end, but I screwed up a lot. And I had to say, sorry, Lindsay, I'm going to redo that sentence. Sorry, Lindsay, I misspoke. I got to do that again. It was a rough one today for some reason. So I'm very thankful for her and her hard work. When this podcast won Best Podcast in Charleston, not last year, but the year before in Best of Charleston, it's not because of me. It's all because of Lindsay and her good work, making me sound good. You know what also sounds good? The music in each and every episode, which is provided by Tyler Boone. Greatly appreciate him allowing us to use his music. And of course, a huge thank you to all of you for listening. I can't wait to talk to you all again on Wednesday. Until then, good night and good luck.